How's it going, everybody? Cam from Flamingo. Today we're doing something a little bit different, and we're actually doing a comparison between the new SMOK RPM40 and the Vinci by VooPoo. I'm going to go over both of these devices and tell you all about them, and of course my opinion on which one is best. Now let's roll the intro and get into the review. So quick fast, let's go over the specs. The RPM40 has a 4.5 milliliter tank, a 1500 milliamp battery, 25 by 25 by 100 millimeters dimensions, and of course goes up to 40 watts. The Vinci by VooPoo is very similar, but it has a 5.5 milliliter tank, a 1500 milliamp battery, 25 by 25 by 104 millimeters tall, and actually goes up to 40 watts. So these two devices are definitely very similar, but when you get up close you can start seeing a lot of the differences. Looking at the mouthpieces on this device, you can tell they're pretty different. The RPM40 mouthpiece is very similar to the Novos, where it's more of just like a bit of a cutout from a solid block. It comes to a pretty wide tip, but I assume that's to be able to accommodate the larger chimney size. Personally, because of how wide this actually is, it did take me a little bit of getting used to it and wasn't really super comfortable right out of the box. Now looking at VooPoo's mouthpiece, this one's definitely more my style. So on the VooPoo mouthpiece, it's kind of rounded around the corners, which makes it feel a little bit more natural when you put it in your mouth. It sounds so weird. Filling these two pods is pretty much the same, and that's because they just have little silicone flaps. The problem with these little silicone flaps is the fact that I'm terrible and I bite my nails. Because I bite my nails, SMOK pods are generally a lot harder for me to open, and I usually need to bust out my knife just to pop it open. VooPoo, on the other hand, seem to think of this issue because they actually give you a little extra bit of silicone on there, so you're still able to get a grip. Silicone flaps are always going to be my biggest gripe with any sort of pod system, AIO kit, whatever it might be. So that's why I usually tend to go more towards devices like the Caliburn, that have kind of more irregular filling systems. But if you don't bite your fingernails, probably none of this matters to you. Now that we're moving on to the body of the device, there's definitely a lot of similarities, but there's also quite a bit of differences. At the top of the device, you're going to notice that there's slots for airflow, except with the VooPoo, you can actually do adjustable airflow. So depending on which way you put the pod into the device, it'll actually give you either a looser draw or a tighter draw, so that way you can adjust it to the coil that you're using. So one thing SMOK is always going to have over the competition is the color variants. There's a handful of color options for the Vinci, however you're always going to get the same shiny gunmetal body. Looking at the RPM40, we actually have tons of different variations in both chrome and just plain gloss finishes. But if you don't really care about it, or you don't mind wiping off your mod every once in a while, then who cares? That's more of a subjective con, as not everybody cares about fingerprints, but if it does bother you, it's something to keep in mind. Overall, I think that the Vinci is a nicer looking device, but that's also because I don't like things that are too loud. So one last little pro I want to mention with the design is actually the fact that the Vinci has a bit of a wider base compared to the RPM40. That way when you put it down, you're less worried about it falling over. But of course, if you just keep things on their side all the time, that doesn't really matter for you, but it is a thing to note. Oh yeah, and it's pretty obvious, but it's really nice being able to see your juice level in the Vinci, just because a lot of AIO kits you actually can't. The actual design of the coils are very similar between the two devices, but I do think VooPoo has a bit of an upper hand on this one. SMOK gives you the new RPM coils, which are really nice, and you're also able to use the Nord coils in a specific Nord pod. The thing about RPM coils is the fact that they actually only go up to 25 watts, which is kind of weird when they're bragging about the 40 watts of power. I'm not too sure why SMOK didn't design a 40 watt coil. And don't get me wrong, if you want to get the RBA section and build a 40 watt coil, boom, there you go, but the majority of people aren't going to be getting the RBA section. So in the Vinci, you actually get a mouth to lung coil, which is 0.8 ohms, and you can vape that between 12 and 18 watts. If you like using freebase juice, they give you a 0.3 mesh coil, which goes all the way up to 40 watts. So because of that, and along with the airflow, this thing really just hits harder than the RPM. I mean, heck, I'm only using 6 milligram juice and it's just smacking me. This flavor just smacks you in the face.
Like that? Yeah, like that.
So neither of these coils have been giving me any wicking issues while using my freebase juice. However, I will say that I do prefer the Vinci coils because they have the larger feed holes, because since we're coming up to winter, that juice is going to get thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. I do want to note, even though I believe that the Vinci coils are better suited for the majority of people, the fact that you can use Nord coils in the RPM means you're going to have no problems finding coils ever. VooPoo is still a pretty darn big brand and you shouldn't have any problems finding the coils, but it's nice having some extra options. So some people care more about form over function, but the thing is, not everything that looks good is going to perform good. The Lambo from One Vape is a perfect example of this because it looks awesome, but it works terribly.
Lambo's bad, and one should feel bad.
He had to suffer through using it. The Vinci, on the other hand, is a terrible example of this because it looks amazing and it performs very well and does more things than I really expected it to. The RPM40, on the other hand, was kind of exactly what I expected. So one of my favorite features about the Vinci is actually the fact that you can switch between using a manual firing switch or you're just using the auto draw. All you need to do is click the fire button 3 times and it'll switch between either auto, manual, or a mix of both. This means if you spill something on your device and your button gets sticky, you're still able to use an automatic draw, which is pretty convenient. Or of course, if condensation builds up in the auto draw sensor, you're still able to use the button to fire it. That way, if you're switching from the 0.3 mesh coil to the 0.8 coil, you're not going to burn it out right away from too much power. And obviously, you're not going to be taking this tank out a whole lot because it holds 5.5 mils of juice. There is one little thing I do want to note though, and that is the fact that the device goes into a standby mode. So when you pick it up, you do need to click it to activate it, and it does go back to that recommended wattage. But for me, I'm always changing my wattage, go down to 25, up to 40, wherever in between. So it's not that big of a deal, but it should be noted. Of course, this thing also has a puff counter, but it also has a puff tracker, so that way you can see how much you've been using it throughout a 14-day basis. This is not something too useful for me, but if you're either trying to reduce or kind of control your vaping habits, it's a cool way to keep track of that information. So on the RPM40, like I said, you can of course lock the wattage and you can go up to 25 watts because that's kind of the max on the coils. So like I mentioned already, it does also have a puff counter, but what's kind of cool about the RPM is the fact that you can change the colors on the screen. All you do is press the fire button and the right button, and that way it'll switch right through the color palettes. So even though you are only limited to 25 watts, it is going to make that 4.5 mil tank stretch a lot longer. There's not really a whole lot to say about this device because it is a very simple setup, which is definitely appealing for a lot of people. So now the question comes, how do they vape? The RPM40 definitely gives you a little bit of an airier, cooler vape, but it works really well. Just like the Vinci, I was still super surprised how well it handled freebase juice considering how thick it can get. So how was the flavor off it? It was pretty good. I will say compared to the Vinci, I didn't get as much of a throat hit using 6 milligram juice, but I think that's probably because the airflow is a little bit looser. The Nord coils, of course, vape like Nord coils, there's not a whole lot to say about that. I do like these RPM coils, and they would be great if they just went a little bit higher in the wattage. I mean, SMOK is known for high wattage, how could they not make that? The Vinci gives me a nice, comfortable, warm vape that I'm used to, but I will say it definitely gets too warm if you're using the tight airflow on higher wattages. So don't get me wrong, it's nice flavor for what it is, and it's gonna get way better flavor than any sort of dinky little pod system. But of course, when you start getting into bigger devices, that's where the flavor gets a lot better. If you really want to get into sub-ohm vaping, I highly recommend the Next Mesh from OFRF. Holy crap, does that thing have good flavor. When it comes to the cloud of these two devices, the Vinci is definitely going to be the clear winner just because you can take it a lot higher wattages. But if you're trying to get off salt nicotine, holy crap do these things hit. I'm only using 6 milligram juice around like 30 to 35 watts, and it hits way harder than my Caliburn with 35 nic. So end of the day, both of these devices are absolutely fantastic, especially if you're trying to make the switch from salt nicotine to regular freebase. It's still super compact like a pod system, and you're able to use either salt nicotine or freebase in it. I do think the Vinci is the better device overall, just because you get a lot more features and it's only $5 more. However, if you do prefer to strictly use salt nicotine, then I would say go with the RPM40, just because you do have the availability of Nord coils. Or of course, if colors really matter to you and you really want a pylon orange or a neochrome device, then SMOK's definitely going to be the one for you. Personally, if I did lose both of these devices, I would easily go back to the store and buy a Vinci the next day. And of course, if you're wondering who copied who, I don't know. I don't know. But I hope you enjoyed this review/comparison video. If you want to see more stuff like that, or if there's any products you want to see reviewed, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. I'm Cam from Flamingo, and I'll see you in the next video.